Hi there everyone, welcome back to On the Flip Side. My name is Adam Shawwalker, your host, and it's time for a review of this new Rammstein record, Zeit. This is the 8th studio album from Rammstein, the follow-up to the 2019 self-titled record. An album that I thought was pretty decent with some stellar tracks, but at times could be a little bit of a mixed bag. On top of a 10-year wait for that record, it was still a little bit disappointing, but I think it still overall was a good, positive album. And it seems now that their creative hiatus has now definitely come to an end. There are no more decade-long waits seemingly from here on out. So Rammstein has a pretty interesting progression in their musical development where their first couple of albums are very industrial heavy, though I wouldn't really call them outright industrial. But early on there's a bit of a shift for their third record with the album Mutter. A great record, mind you, but this is the point where Rammstein have very comfortably creatively existed. You could call it a little bit of stagnation, but generally the style that they nailed down on that album, they've kind of been slowly tweaking for a very long time now. That sound being a very huge arena rock or metal sound, generally a very accessible sound for music that is almost exclusively in German. So like I said, they made a comeback in 2019, and rather than taking the opportunity to develop some new approaches, what they brought to the table was a little bit more of the same. They did at least have a very long time to develop these ideas for those songs, because most of the tracks there are still pretty good. They're one-trick ponies generally, but they do good tricks. So that's why I'm kind of surprised by this new album. I mean, I'm not surprised with the album, but I am surprised with myself for expecting a bigger change. This album is pretty much exactly what you would expect. There really isn't any material I would call awful here, but I am kind of sick of like the token song about sex or pervert fantasies that seem to be a mainstay on every Rammstein album. Other than that though, the tracks range from like decent to pretty good with a couple of like fairly exceptional tracks. I think the lead single and the title track, Zeit, is some of the best work that they've put together in quite a while. It definitely holds its own with some of the other modern hits like Deutschland or Radio. I think the lyrics are very relatable. There's some very desperate, almost pleading lines begging time to slow down or to stop. And this song has a great way of blending these really soul-crushing lines into beautiful moments. Kind of like they're trying to really focus in on more of like the points of time that are perfect and tranquil while still struggling with the march forward of time. Army der Tristen, or Army of the Sad, is a pretty decent album opener that really feels like a track off of like Reise Reise. I do think it's an oddly positive track for Rammstein on the lyrical side of things. These are translated lyrics, of course, but still the overall message feels like a very positive, uplifting experience with a kind of like collective strength that I think is pretty cool. As for some of the other songs that I find have a good impact, I'm really enjoying Zigzag. Angst is pretty good, Lügen is pretty fresh, and the final track, Adieu, is a great send-off. Zigzag was of course the second single for this album, a pretty gruesome track about stacking cosmetic surgeries and struggling with fading beauty. I do really like these grim lines about whoever wants to be the most beautiful needs to suffer the most. There's a very clear price that must be paid. I just think that this is Rammstein at their best when they're tackling these really incredibly uncomfortable topics. It's exactly what you want to hear from the guys because frankly it's when they're at their best. Angst, translated to fear, is another track about the fear of death, in this case compared to a children's game called The Black Man. If you're unfamiliar, that's fine, I kind of was too, but it's fairly similar to the game British Bulldog, if you ever played that. That is another game involving a field and trying to get from one side to the other without getting tackled or caught by some person or persons in the middle. Anyway, most of that is pretty irrelevant, but hey, there's some context for you. Lyrics are kind of broad, but mostly feel like it's talking about the fear of impending death, which seems to be a main theme for this album, so it does make sense. Lügen, which translates to lying, seems like a track about mental health and imposter syndrome. It doesn't really feel like a sleazy track, so I don't think that this song is meant to be about lying or cheating on your spouse, though it can kind of seem like that if you isolate just the lyrics from the music. I just think that this is a really personal track about insecurity and a false sense of self. It's really good. Lyrics aside, this song has a lot of really cool vocal effects. They do overuse the auto-tune a little bit, but I think it works well with the theme of the track. Like, this performance is false. There's this like layer of being a liar on top of the lyrics, so it's spoken and demonstrated, which I think is kind of a cool idea. The last track on the album, Adieu, is a really weirdly beautiful track about saying farewell to a person's spirit in death. There's some really poetic lines about having to go the last way alone, but you'll always have us or these people. It's a really touching track and is pretty fresh. I do enjoy that there's some really sensitive topics here that aren't necessarily just edgy or uncomfortable in a disgusting way. It's kind of an important thing to have this balance, and they do a really good job having both of those angles here. So that's kind of the end of the highlight tracks for me. Like I said, the rest of the songs here are fine. Schwartz is a decent but kind of overall redundant track. Lyrically, it's very mopey, it's obsessed with darkness, it's kind of just a very juvenile track. Giftig does have a little bit of a fresher angle or approach instrumentally. The track Okay is okay. It's a song about unprotected sex. There's nothing really else past that. It's honestly one of the moments where it dips past low brow into just being very low-hanging fruit. Meine Tränen is kind of an interesting one. The lyrics kind of deal with child abuse while also sort of talking about the tragedy of losing your mother to old age. And I think that there's a little bit of a conflicting meaning in this song that maybe just doesn't really translate well, but anyway, the instrumentals are fine. It's not really a particularly catchy song, but it is kind of moody. I think the only track that I haven't mentioned yet is Dicke Titten, which translates to big tits. I do actually kind of like this track though. As for the obligatory tracks about sex, this is the better of the two on the album. I like that this track is kind of just about getting older and wanting to find someone. Not really caring about personality or even someone who's very beautiful or smart. They just need to have big tits. Which, you know, fair. So, like I said, Rammstein are really not advancing their sound much, but they still know how to play to their strengths. I think there's some tracks on here that are duds, but most of the material on this album is pretty above average. And it would be cool to see a bit of a return to their older industrial sound, but I still think that they're doing a pretty good job maintaining course. Zeit is a pretty solid 7. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of the album in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe and check out my Instagram, my Reverb, and my Depop. Links to those are in the description below. Thank you all so much again, and we'll see you on the flip side.